Gentlemen, pay attention now. May I introduce Richard Leary, youth worker, much experience. And we, as mainly grandparents, I think, have a great interest in hearing what he has to say. So he has been in the work for a long time, and we look forward to hearing how it is, how it was, where he's been, and the kind of people that he helps. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a bit strange with the mic setup. Definitely a face for radio, so I'm hearing it's going out on YouTube. So thankfully we're not filming today, because that would be a bit scary. Oh no, that's okay. So thank you for the invitation. It's always nice to come and talk about the work that I do and the work that we do at the youth club, and you know, for people to kind of understand the world of teenagers and kind of what goes on. It's nice to be able to kind of share that with people. So what I'm going to try and do today is just kind of give a little bit of background about kind of myself and my journey as a youth worker and sort of youth work professional. Maybe think a little bit about the world that young people are living in now, because possibly that's changed a little bit from when we were youngsters. And maybe share some examples of how the work that we do kind of impacts young people and their sort of journey. So little about me. I've worked at the youth club since 1998, so that's been quite a long time. So I think officially I'm part of the inventory, so we've got so many tables, so many chairs, and there's a box that says Richard now. So that's just being part of a community and sort of being part of something I really enjoy. So that's why I've stayed. I was first there as a full-time worker, so that was my sort of regular job. And then following a restructure, and if anyone's ever worked for a local authority, you'll know that they restructure quite regularly. So when things changed, I actually went off to do a different job full-time somewhere else, and then kept Ashtead Youth Club as a sort of part-time interest. And I've stayed part-time there for many years now. So I've kind of had two careers, as it were. The youth club work has remained largely the same. What we do is sort of day in, day out, is quite similar. For a sort of daytime career, if you like, I've done lots of different things. So I've worked with youth justice within Surrey, so working with the young offenders, or preventative projects, which was more my area. I ran a mentoring scheme for a little while. So members of the community used to come alongside the young people and kind of help them through their journey into kind of being in a better place, I guess. I've worked in community development, so I ran a project that ran across all of Surrey, working with communities to sort of work with their own young people. And then I took a role as a team manager in a case management service. So that's a bit more of the formal side, and that was doing sort of the young offenders work, some of the statutory work, which works under legislation, such as child in need. So we had a social work team within our group that did some of that work, working young people who were at risk of homelessness. That is an issue in Surrey. People might not kind of often see that, but that is a thing sometimes. Youngsters that need a job, so they call it NEAT. So if you've ever heard that phrase, so not an employment, education or training. And there used to be quite a push with that. And to be fair, generally with a lot of youngsters, if you nail that aspect, a lot of the other stuff just kind of falls into line. So, and then also we worked an early help service with families. So where families were struggling but didn't need a social worker, they worked with our team just to kind of work through some of the things that were going on. So I worked that job until 2019. Surrey restructured again, as they do. And at that point I decided actually the way preventative services were being restructured, that wasn't kind of for me, so I decided to take their redundancy package, took a year off, and actually enrolled at Sussex University to train as a social worker, to think about a second career, possibly working with older people rather than younger people, but haven't quite made my mind up. So I am in that position. It also kind of kicked the decision of what I was going to do down the line by 3 years. So I'm in that position where it's kind of, what do you want to be when you're grown up? Which is very strange to be doing that at my age, which is a bit odd. So at the moment, I'm on a placement working at the Marsden Cancer Hospital over in Sutton with their children's social work team. And that's an area of work I'd never even thought of before I'd done the course. And they do some incredible work supporting the families in very difficult situations. So it's doing something different enables you to kind of expand your horizons. So I've very much enjoyed that. So all this goes on, as has gone on, whilst working at the youth club. And my role has evolved there. Still running the youth work team, but also now the youth club is managed and run by a charity, the Friends of Ashtead Youth Club charity, of which I'm a trustee. We've got a number of other trustees, a committee, and we've taken the building over from Surrey County Council, and we've taken the delivery of the youth work over from the council as well. So we're now an independent unit. We're fortunate that we've been able to team up with the East Surrey YMCA, who have been absolutely amazing in supporting us and developing our sort of independent position, as it were. So yeah, so we're kind of going it alone, which is an interesting experience. So that's where I've got to personally, a little bit of background. Thinking about the young people, I'd say that probably young people aren't, on one hand, aren't radically different from where they were 20 years ago. So the kind of things in people's lives are quite similar. So thinking about how they get along with their family and friends, their peers, thinking about emotional health, which is a thing that's particularly relevant now. Some young people get into trouble. That's always happened, that always will. The pressure to succeed in school, that's not changed over the years. Although possibly now the consequences of not succeeding in school are felt a bit further kind of reaching. And then transitioning between life stages. So going between primary and secondary school is a big crunch point. Going from education to work, the world of work, and then thinking about that movement from being an adolescent into being an adult. It's debatable whether some of us ever make that transition particularly successfully, and may depend on who in your family you ask as to whether you've done that or not. But I would say the world around young people has changed radically in the last 20 years. So if we consider social media, that has a massive influence on young people. It also has the impact that they can't get away from the world that they're in. So when we were youngsters at school, if we had an issue at school with someone, we could leave the school, go home, and whatever that issue was would be put on pause. Nowadays, with social media, whatever's going on in your life follows you around with, I'll try not to knock the mic off, one of these. And whatever issue you've got with someone, or a concern, or an interaction with someone, if that's a positive interaction, then the positivity follows you around. If that's a negative interaction, the negative follows you around as well. I'm going to put that down there. Hopefully it doesn't go off. So yeah, so if that virtual world is an unfriendly place, then you can't get away from it. And that has a huge impact on people. How young people find out their information and how they socialise, again, is radically different. And that's all linked with electronics. So the gaming platforms now, the Xbox and the PlayStation, is a way to interact with friends. It's a social tool in a way that it never was years ago. And I'm sure many of you have got, I'm going to say grandkids maybe, unless you're particularly old parents, with the youngsters spend hours and hours and hours. But they're not just playing the game, they're also talking on something similar to this. And they're chatting away and they're interacting. And that's part of young people's socialisation now, in a way it never has been in the past, which is very different. And that brings lots of positives, particularly during periods of lockdown, for example, that we've all experienced. Young people were still able to socialise with their friends. And it also brings risks, because potentially anyone across the world can access a youngster through a PlayStation platform. So you could be playing someone in Los Angeles, you could be playing someone in Sydney, which in the globalization could be a positive thing, but also someone with ill intent could potentially be accessing young people in a way that isn't positive. So it brings good and positives and negatives as well. The pressure and requirement to achieve academically now is really important. I'll use an example of a youngster in a little while who didn't do well at school and has now done exceptionally well. These days, if you don't get your maths and English GCSE as a minimum, it stops you doing any further training pretty much until you get that basic qualification, because none of the training providers will accept you. So if you don't get that very basic, you're not able to progress in any kind of training theme. And there's kind of thing, this idea that safety with young people, there is a realistic situation where knife crime is increasing across the country, and gangs are more of an issue now. There's this county lines, which I don't know if people have heard about county lines, and that brings risks to young people. And that county lines is in essence the gangs in city centres reach out to more rural communities or outlying areas around drug distribution, in essence. A few other things as well, but that's the essence of it. So they try and manipulate young people locally to be part of their distribution network, because local young people don't stick out to the local police, whereas people coming in from outside often do. The way they behave or the way they look can be more distinctive, whereas if you get a youngster in a local school uniform, they blend in. So sometimes young people locally are manipulated by those people, and they are absolutely ruthless. And Ashtead, as safe as it is, and it is probably one of the safest places in the country, I'd imagine, we're not immune to that influence. So that does happen sometimes. So the world around young people is different, and that requires a slightly different approach. As a result of COVID, we have observed a marked impact on emotional health. So young people are not as emotionally healthy as they were before the COVID. Socially, their development has been impacted, and just their interaction with people has been stifled over that period. For some of our youngsters, it's taken them quite a while to come back to the youth club. Some of them have just been almost institutionalised at home because of the experience of lockdowns, and they've just got used to being at home. For some, it's disrupted their friendship groups. And if we think about life stages, 14, 15, it's all about your friends, entirely reliant on your friends. Everything, your social interactions, it's all about your friends at 14, 15. Your parents are a slight memory, they're a slight distraction, irritation maybe. Lockdown sort of messed with all that because they weren't able to see their friends. Yes, there was the online contact, wasn't the same as being at school. Even when they were at school, the way some of the schools managed different year groups, if you were in bubble A and your friends were in bubble B, you didn't get to see them. And that was for kind of 6 months, 8 months almost. So we have seen friendship groups change and be disruptive, and there's new friendship groups, and old friendship groups aren't quite the same as they used to be. And at that stage of sort of 14, 15, that's been very disruptive for some youngsters. So what we've seen at the youth club is that people have been really keen to do things as a group. So we've geared our program around that. So lots of group social activities to get everyone back in, just engaging with each other again. And for some kind of forgot how to behave around other people, which sounds kind of weird. But some of the lively ones, maybe, that are a little more off the wall, we had to almost go through a process of them adjusting back in with the group and just remembering how to. It's those social skills around people. When all you've had is your family to be around, it's almost like letting a spring out of a box for some of the youngsters. They were so excited to be around with other people. There was a process sort of adjusting back into being part of the community. So that was a really interesting kind of process. So what we do at the youth club is, when it's done well, what we deliver is an educational service, but it's very different to the education at school. So much of the time, the young people aren't really conscious of that process. They just kind of join in because it's fun, it's exciting, they're having fun with their friends. but there is a lot of learning in what we do. And what young people are learning about is thinking about who they are, working out their place in the world, how they fit in and kind of work with the people around them. And we're all about developing skills to make that successful transition to adulthood. And that would be things about relationships, social skills, communication, and importantly, employability skills, which is something we've always focused on. And so we work with any young person aged between 11 and 18 that wants to come down and spend time with us. There's no differentiation between people. And we do get a range of social and economic backgrounds. Ashtead is an interesting place because there's quite a wide variety of people. There was a report done by Surrey Community Foundation a few years ago called the Hidden Surrey Report, which illustrated just the differences within communities. You've got wealth, you've got people without wealth, you've got people with different sort of social backgrounds, all within a sort of given area. And Ashtead does have that mix, and we've always promoted the opportunities at the youth club to be available for anyone that wants to come and use our services. Having said that, we will focus our energies and our skills on the youngsters that maybe need a bit more support. So everyone's happy to take part, welcome to take part, but we will focus on those youngsters that maybe need just a bit more support and a little more energy. So at the moment, our main outcomes are thinking around emotional well-being for young people in that recovery from the kind of COVID impact, and thinking about future employability and their social skills. So as they make that transition, we're trying to support them into sustainable careers. So the idea that there's millions of jobs out there, why can't anyone get a job? If so many of those jobs are in the gig economy, where you're on 0-hour contracts, there's no training, there's no advancement route, those jobs are fine for a little while, but what we want our youngsters to be involved in is jobs with career paths and a future. So that's what we're working towards. So what we do is provide a safe space for young people just to enjoy themselves, be themselves, spend time with their friends. That's the hook, really, and that's what gets people in. And then for them to get to know a dependable adult, I'm laughing here, role model, a friend maybe with boundaries because we're a professional, but in essence, it's a safe person that the youngsters can get support with any of those issues that I've kind of talked about. And that's the essence of what we do. And we're someone there that can offer what I would describe as a safe challenge. So where young people have got a certain way of viewing things or a certain way of doing things, if someone comes alongside and says, well, you can do it that way, and this is how it's working out, it may not be working out quite so well, have you thought about doing it this way? What's a different way of thinking about that? What's a different way of managing that works out better for you? And that's what we do. And we also get to know families. So if we think that everyone grows up in a system of support around them. So you've got the youngster in the middle, you've got their immediate family, and then their extended family, and then their community, and society as a whole. So there's a whole system that people exist within. So we, as youth workers, try and interact with that system a little bit. So we will often talk to parents. I always make an effort when parents are picking up and dropping off. I always say, hello, how's your week been? Just a little bit of chit chat with the parents to get to know people. Because when a youngster is having some challenges or some issues, it's much better for me to be able to just chat with the parent that already knows me, and we can kind of work together around what's going on with that youngster. So there's some tools that we use in our toolkit. Relationship building is the main thing that we do. So get to know people, talk to people, gain people's trust, and that's the essence. That's all done through communication, of course. We do have some techniques. We're not therapists, but we do use sort of cognitive behavioural techniques, which is getting people to think about how they interact with situations, how they think about people's actions towards them, how they respond to that. Solution-focused approaches as well. So thinking about, given the situation, what are we going to do moving forward? What do we want to achieve? So there is some science behind it as well. But like I said, we're not therapists, but we do use some of those techniques. And we go on a journey with people. So there's a kind of do with approach rather than the do to. So it's a kind of shared process. And the actual kind of reality of how that looks to someone who comes through the door is that we've got this great youth club with lots of things to do, staff that are quite friendly and have a bit of a giggle with you. We've got toys. We've got some really good toys. So someone mentioned earlier that the karting, for example, is a real hook for some youngsters. It gives me a little leverage sometimes as well if I want to make a point. You know, if people are really pushing their luck, then I take my toys and go home. You know, it doesn't happen. But sometimes I can use that as a bit of leverage. But also doing those really exciting activities gives us an opportunity to kind of challenge, to get people to think about things, and also to teach a huge range of skills. So with the karting, there's a huge amount of social skills, communication skills, technical skills. Youngsters love that. We do the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. We've done that for years. There was a pause for a little while. Ashtead Rotary very kindly have just offered to sponsor us with reintroducing that award, which is fantastic. That's part of our employability outcomes. The Duke of Edinburgh's Award is a really great badge to be able to take to an employer, because it tells an employer that you can work in a team, you can commit to something, you can communicate with people in the way that a GCSE doesn't necessarily tell people that. A big part of what we do is develop leadership potential. So any youngster that is keen to help out in little ways, we'll encourage that. If the older ones want to help with the younger ones, we'll encourage that as well, because again, that's a life skill that they will take away with them. And then we do fun stuff, so activity days. We'll go out. We were fortunate to get funding this summer. We took a big group paintballing, which we haven't done in years and years, and they absolutely loved it, because a lot of them hadn't had the opportunity to do that. It's very expensive. A little worrying how many were quite keen to shoot me. For the most part, I just hid behind a barrel most of the day. But that group experience of doing that's absolutely brilliant. And we do kind of adventure holidays and residentials as well. Over the years, we've done some quite interesting ones. So we've done a couple of visits to Poland to visit the Auschwitz camp that's out there in Krakow. So, you know, educating young people about extremism. We've done a couple of that. Many years ago, we took a group to India for 3 weeks. That was a one-off, I think. We'll never get the chance to do that again. But it was a life-changing experience, I'd say for all involved, but primarily for the young people. It made them get a real perspective on their life here compared to the life that they saw. And we went to Goa, which is a fairly kind of accessible part of India that isn't, you know, it's fairly tourist friendly. So, you know, compared with some areas in India, it would have been a far more extreme experience. So, but for those youngsters that came with us, it was absolutely life changing, and they got a whole new perspective. So that's part of what we do. So if I give you examples, I've just got sort of 3 youngsters that I can highlight. They're not youngsters anymore. These are all youngsters that have been and gone. So just so no one could sort of recognise anyone. I've changed the names anyway. But so let's think about John. So he was age 13 when he first came to us. He wasn't getting on well at school. Family life had been challenging. So as a result, I'd say he was quite a handful in many situations. He found the world to be hostile because he was getting in trouble a lot. So we engaged him and his sort of peer group through the karting project. It was something he was particularly keen on doing. We recognised his potential to learn and work with people through the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. And we worked alongside his mum to support him to navigate that school transition, not that he was in school that much, and apply for an apprenticeship. So our approach for him was about reframing his attributes. So what school saw as unhelpful and disruptive, when we rechanneled that, his energy to get involved with things, we turned into leadership potential. So he was always, he interrupted a lot and things like that. But we took that and actually channeled him, gave him a job to do, gave him some responsibility, gave him that support and that relationship as well. And that gave him a legitimate platform and sense of achievement sense of place in the world, and that worked really well for him. He applied for an apprenticeship with I'll just got they're kind of a national energy company. He's now a project manager for them, earning far more money than I ever have, I'll be honest. And his career prospects will go up. He'll do very well in that organisation. So that's a young person. We've taken all those skills and all that energy and enabled him to see what his potential can be. The process of that probably took about 5 years. Okay, this isn't an overnight process. And that's kind of why I've stayed for so long, because actually the work does take time, and you're kind of investing in people over a period of time. So the second one, Emily, she was flagged by her primary school as we were delivering transition sessions from year 6 to year 7, which is where you go from being a big fish in a small pond to a very small fish in a big pond. Particularly if you go to a school like Thurfield that's got, I don't know, 1,400 students maybe. It's a big change. The school were worried about her behaviour, her emotional well-being, and kind of how she would make friends, and then how that friendship group would kind of behave as a group. So, yeah, she was quite a lively character, to say the least. She still is quite a lively character, because that's who she is. But when her and her friends came down to the youth club, we were able to build a relationship with them, have a bit of fun, but at the same time, kind of that CBT approach, which is get them to think about, so you're upset with the teachers, what's going on? What was the situation? How are you responding to that? Is there a different way to respond to that so you don't get in trouble? Interaction with some teachers is positive, other teachers is negative. What's different? What's going on? So enabling them to think about their situation and just respond differently, maybe to the same stimulus, because the teaching staff are going to be the teaching staff. They're not going to change. So how you navigate your school experience, how you behave with other people, how you express yourself, was a big part of what we did with her and the group. And whilst they were still quite lively, they managed to navigate school in a successful way and actually get on with their education, because all of the noise and the drama detracts from actually getting an education at the end of it. So if you can kind of bring the noise and the drama down quite a lot, they can get on with learning and do quite well. And that's what we kind of helped to nurture with that group. It wasn't all us, the school had a huge input as well, but that was our process with Emily. And then lastly, I'll talk about Charlie. So we met Charlie when he was 12. He joined the youth club with a bit of a reputation. He was a bit of a bruiser, if I'm honest. Tiny little lad, but had a reputation. And he did view the world as hostile through whatever experience he's brought into that point. So his reaction was to get in there first. So I won't allow you to hurt me because I'm gonna hurt you first. So I was able to kind of build a rapport with him, which calmed him down. There was a relationship there that clicked. So he described me as his kryptonite, I think. So he was calm when he was up with us. He wasn't always calm elsewhere. We worked a lot with Mum, sort of tag teams quite a bit. He knew we were doing it, so it wasn't sort of behind the scenes. So we tag teamed and kind of worked between us to think about what was working good for him, what was not working so well. And again, it's a youngster that got heavily involved with the karting, Duke of Edinburgh's award, and I've explained how that kind of supports young people to get that sense of achievement, sense of confidence. He also started becoming involved with working with the younger ones, because he was kind of drawn to what we did. He recognised the benefit of working within the youth club and thought, well, maybe I could help the other youngsters. He was brilliant, because he'd had that lived experience. He could talk to the other youngsters in a way that I can't. There's just kind of a natural communication. So for him, the science was about just helping him feel safe and being in a place that he was approved of, he was cared for, he felt safe with us. And that then helped him to sort of put some of the nonsense to the side and get on with just being successful and confident. Fortunately, we were able to offer him opportunities at the youth club and the family support team that I was working in at the time in Epsom. They turned into paid opportunities because he did so well. At 19, he was accepted onto a sort of social work degree course, and he recently graduated last summer with the first class honours. Now, I'll pause for a minute. That makes me slightly emotional to talk about that because his journey has been incredible. And that's what we're about. So, and that's why it's worth doing the work that we do. So, I'm going to stop there and just pause for a minute. That's actually the end of the talk, so thank you for that. I didn't expect that to happen, to be fair. So I'll take a drink. Thank you for listening. I would invite your questions, and hopefully by the time you've got the mic out, I'll be able to talk to you. So.
Walk around with the mic. We do have a small innovation.
Use the mic. Use the mic. You can talk into it.
Oh, okay. We do have a small innovation this month. We had a few problems on the recordings with question time, in that while we could hear the speaker beautifully, if the question came from the other side of the floor, it was almost inaudible. And despite my best efforts, I couldn't boost the volume enough. So as we have questions, I'll walk around and just hand the mic around as we go. So can we have a question from anyone, please? Who's going to kick us off? Okay. Malcolm.
Thanks, Richard. You mentioned so many issues there, but on a personal level, I've got a grandson who's moving up from primary to secondary school in September. It's always happened over the years, but just can you give us some pointers as to issues to look out for and how to help him really get through that transition?
Sure. Generally, most kids make a really easy transition. So initially, I'd say don't worry too much, unless you know already that there's something to worry about. Then probably chances are he's going to make an absolutely fine transition. It's made easier if they get involved in all the introduction days, and if there's a camp or whatever, encourage them to get involved with all of that, because that helps settle in and get to know some of the new sort of youngsters in his class or whatever's going on. Yeah, chances are he's probably moving up with some of his friends. Yeah. So if that's the case, if there's a group of them moving up and they all get along quite well, that kind of helps that sort of movement. And then just kind of, I guess, maybe helping them be organised as they can. I mean, that's more of a parent thing maybe, but making sure, they've got all the right kit on the right day. It's really hard for them to, so with primary school, kind of someone organises everything for you in your bag, you get sent along, you kind of do your thing, you come home, it's quite easy. Secondary school, the pressure, you get in there, it's this massive building, you're surrounded by people that are towering over you. Finding your way around is quite tricky. So I think anything that can help them kind of be organised. So maybe some of the adults that are in their lives that I'll kind of go, right, do you know what you're doing? Have you got the right stuff? Is your PE kit ready? Is it by the door so you can put it in your bag as you go out? The sort of organisational side, if people can help with that for a little while, they've only got to focus on, once they get there, just being in the right place at the right time with the right people, can make life a little easier. Yeah, but I wouldn't worry too much, because most kids, the transition's absolutely fine. The ones we tend to find out about are the ones that school flag with us, that will kind of say, actually, they're already having a bit of a tricky time, and therefore it's more likely to be a challenge. So.
Clive.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. You mentioned at the beginning about responsible adults for mentoring. How do you choose them, and where do you get them from?
So for that specific scheme, we advertised sort of publicly, and people would apply, and then they would go through a sort of selection process. and then they would go through a training process. And only once they'd gone through all those processes would they finally be approved as a mentor. So there's a little testing that happens as you go along, just to make sure people have got the right sort of frame of mind and the right approach to young people. That was particularly relevant to the sort of young people who were offending group, because obviously there's a particular way to kind of approach that that we were looking for. So yeah, there was a long process before someone was finally matched with a young person.
Another question. You've talked about your 3 cases who are with you long term. I wonder what the turnover is. How many kids start and then drop out?
I can tell you traditionally, at the moment, everything's just been turned on its head because of the COVID experience. But traditionally, you would tend to have larger numbers with the younger group. So maybe we'd have a group of 40, say, younger ones, between the age of 11 and 13, 14. And then we'd maybe have a smaller group of the older group as they hit 18. So the older they become, they tend to tail off, which is fine because they're getting jobs, they're finding other interests, which is the way it should be. If they're all still there at 18, that's not always a good thing. Although many do stay on and support us, so many will stay on as volunteers and help us with the projects that we run or the evening sessions. At the moment, it's kind of all gone upside down because of COVID. The group that we had lined up to be our sort of new leaders, when COVID hit, they all just kind of went off and developed other interests, which is entirely right, but then we lost them, as it were. So we lost them for them to do something else, which is fine. So at the moment, our group makeup is just upside down compared with what it normally would be based on the regular logic. But normally, larger group when they're younger, which comes down to a smaller group as they become older, that's often reflected in many youth organisations. So that's a kind of trend.
Richard, can I ask you, thank you for filling in about the history of the club. We've watched it going through its various stages, and I'm delighted to hear that it's now really stable with that group of trustees running it, and that you are in control in a way you haven't perhaps been in the past. Well, I wonder in what way we as a men's group can assist the work that you're doing there, and how we can perhaps identify, come alongside, or just remember you in our prayers and our thoughts as we go past. What's a practical way in which we might be able to help you?
Sure. Well, being remembered in prayers and thoughts is always very much appreciated, so thank you. Sometimes we'll have sort of practical jobs that might need doing, that might be a bit beyond our reach. Not necessarily building things, but where people, I know some people in this room, but not everybody. There's a whole range of skills and experience in this room that could possibly contribute. So, for example, if we needed help with a finance issue, there may well be someone with a background in finance here. Or if there was a health and safety issue, there might be someone with a health and safety background. So the opportunity just to reach out and kind of say to people, actually, if someone has got some spare time and could help us with a particular thing going on at the time, just having that option to kind of reach out to people with a range of skills would be really helpful to us. So I don't know how people feel about that, but that would be.
Do you have a website as well that we can keep informed about what's going on? That's where your requests for help are?
Yeah, not at the moment. There is one. It was set up primarily to discuss the consultation about youth services a couple of years ago. It hasn't changed since. It's just a time thing. So if anyone has got a keen interest on web design, that would be something we'd be keen to hear about. At the moment, my time is all about doing the stuff with the youngsters, and a bit of buildings maintenance and managing the lettings groups and a few other things like that. So that has fallen to the wayside at the moment. But so that's one really good example. For example, yeah. So no, we don't, but we would like one. So. Yeah.
Sorry, Mike, can I just pass you the microphone?
Just make a suggestion on that, if maybe you formed a Friends of Ashtead Youth Club and people could put their name on it with their particular skills or what they could offer.
Yeah.
Rather than a big website that never happens. Just a list, get it out there that you've got this list for as Friends of Ashtead. So, you know, maybe a couple of guys here put their name on it. And so if you have a particular issue, you've got a list of people that you could possibly call on.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful. Yeah, good
idea.
idea.
Can I pitch a question now? Is it something? Yeah. One thing that has interested me over the years is the way the world has changed in relation to our relationship with young people. But of course, there will be a question following this, by the way. But I noticed back in 1990, there was something like 10% of the population went to university and 80% actually went to work. And then we had the education thing came in, and it was completely reversed, where we had 80% of the population went to university and 10% didn't. And it seemed at that point there was tremendous dropout situation that started to occur with young people. They were losing, there was not a lot of connection between school and work, and there wasn't a lot of things that were going on in relation to the government to how we deal with this 10% that are being left behind. Have you noticed sort of that consequence coming into how things are now?
Well, there was legislation introduced, I can't quite remember the date, but let's say 10 years ago, that required, or it certainly suggested young people should stay in an education provision until they were 18. I mean, that's certainly what was communicated. That wasn't technically what was required, but the idea was that young people stayed in education for longer, and that would then give them more opportunities sort of later in life, as it were. I think what I'm seeing is young people are questioning the cost of university and the fact that they will be paying that back for a period of time. Well, for a lifetime. Yeah. So for people on a fairly regular wage, the university cost is in essence just an additional tax. You know, at the end of the month. So we do have alternative. There are more alternative routes to gaining the same kinds of qualifications now. So there's more apprenticeship schemes, and there's different levels of apprentice. So the sort of very high level apprenticeships, you can get a degree standard qualification whilst working at the same time. So a lot of youngsters are looking at some of those routes as well. A number of our youngsters probably don't think about university as an option right now, or that standard of education. So they might go into a trade. Now, by the time they've gone through their trade, you know, they've done their BTEC sort of standard level, advanced level, you know, go on to do different qualifications. They're as qualified as anyone else at the end of the day, but that might take them 10 years whilst they're doing it on the job. So yeah, there's a range of options now. I don't quite yet understand how COVID may have affected the choice that is there. So is there still the same number of options? I don't know, than there was 2 years ago. That may well be the case that there's less currently. And that's why as a youth centre, we're focusing on thinking about what makes our young people as employable as they can be, and that, you know, they can find a career route that will give them a future, rather than just sort of sitting still in a cafe somewhere, because that's, for me, that's not okay. You know, unless they really want to get into that, and in which case that's fine. But if they're in a job just because it's a job rather than a career, then that's wrong to me.
James.
Thank you, Richard. Wonderful talk, and get a real feel for how it is with you out there. A simple question. How does one come alongside a young person who's gone very quiet or is rebellious? What are the pointers? How can you start a conversation? What should you not say? What is usually helpful?
It is difficult sometimes. Even I still find it difficult with some youngsters. It's little steps for me. So it'll be saying hello to someone as they come in and then goodbye as they go out. It can be really simple things like that. So just starting a positive rapport. I mean, when you're related to them, that's slightly different. But I think the concept of a positive interaction to start with. Even if it's, I mean, there's a stereotype that teenagers grunt. Sometimes stereotypes are there because it's based on some level of reality. And with teenagers, that might possibly be okay to sort of do that. Yeah, I mean, I guess responding to the grunts as positively as possible. And really, we just try and find something in common. So ask about their day, how they're doing, what's going on. Can be helpful because then it makes it all about them. And then trying to find something that they're interested in. So, you know, a lot of youngsters are interested in games. And they might entertain for a little while trying to explain to someone how that works and what goes on and what the dynamics are. The influencers and social media channels, some of those can be quite entertaining for everybody. So some of them won't be, but some of them can be quite interesting to watch. So I've got a little godson who's 6 and I watch stuff with him. Some of it is painful and some of it is quite amusing. So I guess just spending time doing something they're interested in, and the what not to do, it's a bit tricky. I guess it's whose agenda is it that you're kind of thinking about, and for me, imposing my agenda on them is far less successful than trying to work with their agenda, whatever that agenda happens to be. So I guess it's trying to work out what their agenda is, or what they're interested in, or what's important to them, rather than trying to impose what I'm interested in and what's important to me. So that's not very specific, but there's kind of an approach there. So is that helpful? Yes, excellent. So just take an interest in them and what they're doing. And it might have no interest to us whatsoever, but because it's important to them, it's important to us. And that's my sort of guide, I guess.
Rupert.
Thank you, Richard. I'm very interested, particularly in the 3 examples that you gave and the way in which the people were able to progress after that time. Indeed, in preparing people for life after youth club, do you have contact with employers? Do you have contact with training organisations in which you can then channel them into, or how do you prepare them to go on to the next stage in their lives?
Sure. Probably less than we used to, if I'm honest with you. So for us, it's probably about knowing how to connect people with things. So in terms of training providers, it's a very kind of mechanical process for the most part. So, you know, so long as they tick a box, generally we'll talk about maybe an interview technique with someone. But the local colleges are pretty good at sort of giving young people a chance. So even if they don't quite meet the mark, they very often will, you know, if we can do a recommendation and sort of try sort of coach the young person in how to approach an interview, very often they'll get given the opportunity. In terms of the employers, it's just on a case by case really. We don't have that level of network at the moment. It's been better many years ago, but not more recently. But we can do a bit of homework to find out about an employer if a youngster's got a particular interest, and then we'll talk them through how to approach them.
John.
Sorry, I've gone on quite a while, but I do apologise. But
carry on. Thank you. Very interesting talk. I've been involved all my life with an organisation that takes disabled children to Lourdes each year, and increasingly we also take disadvantaged children, and they're normally in a family group of about 8 or 9 children, and half as many again helpers, mainly young helpers. But what we've increasingly found is that the disadvantaged children become young helpers in their own right. Is that something that you find in your life with the youth groups, that some of the children you're looking after and helping are helping other children who are in difficulties? Is that something you've experienced?
Yeah, I think it's a fair reflection, really. Quite often, people that have experienced challenge recognise the benefit of what you do for them, and it can almost be part of their own process to actually offer that back to other people. So it can be good for them to offer that service to other people, as well as the benefit of the person on the other end. So yeah, it's. I mean, we might kind of frame that within developing leadership, but there's also that element of volunteering, being part of the community. So when I talked earlier about people being part of a system, you know, when someone becomes part of a system for someone else, they kind of find themselves a place in a community, which is something bigger than themselves. So that sense of belonging and ownership and feeling connected with the world around them, it can kind of increase that sense of well-being as well. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that probably is just about it on the questions. And it falls to me to say a couple of words of thank you to Richard for coming along today. So Richard, firstly, thanks for coming along and thanks for talking to us. I think you probably saw from the interest during question time that the talk has gone extremely well. If you look around the room, you see that we are, of course, gentlemen of a certain age. And so I'd like to thank you, first of all, for the section at the beginning where you attempted to explain to us the world in which teenagers live. I think that will stand us all in good stead. As you probably correctly guessed, most of us are, in fact, or many of us are, in fact, grandparents. So it's about time we started reconnecting with the younger ones. In my day, when I was a teenager, no, you'll see. Wait till you hear what's coming next. When I was a teenager, youth club actually meant Friday night an opportunity to meet with your friends, perhaps meet some persons of the opposite gender, which didn't happen when you went to an all-boys school. And that was about it. So I think we're quite surprised to see the range of services that you actually provide. And I think the thing that probably strikes me is that as if people are picked up at the right time, a little corrective adjustment goes a long way. So what you do is not easy, I'm pretty sure. So you spent I think if I've worked it out, 24 years doing it so far.
It's about that.
So for many people, that's almost a working life. Thank you. Whatever you decide to do next, good luck. And thanks again for coming today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So I think well, that's very helpful, gentlemen. That round of applause gives me just the right place to cut the soundtrack when I edit it. Okay. Okay. If you could just lend a hand bringing a few bits and pieces up to help tidy up, that would be great. Thanks again, and we hope to see you all in March. Bye for now.